The morning sun sliced through the tall glass windows of the Denver District Courthouse, casting pale rectangles of light across the polished marble floor. Outside, the city was loud: sirens, traffic, reporters shouting, and protesters holding signs. But inside, the air felt thick, tense, and unnaturally still. Courtroom 7B was already packed an hour before proceedings began. Wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators. Journalists lined the back wall, cameras mounted on tripods, lenses pointed like eyes waiting to capture a single telling moment. Legal interns shuffled papers nervously. Uniformed officers stood rigid near the exits, hands clasped behind their backs, faces unreadable. This was not a routine trial. This was a case that had divided a city. At the front of the room sat Judge Caldwell, a veteran of 3 decades on the bench. Her silver hair was tied neatly in a bun, her expression carefully neutral. Yet even she couldn't hide the faint crease between her brows, a sign that this case weighed heavily on her. To her right sat the jury, 12 men and women, some arms folded tightly, others staring blankly at the floor, all burdened with the responsibility of deciding a man's future. That man sat just a few feet away. Former K-9 officer Mark wore a crisp navy suit instead of his usual uniform. His badge was gone. His nameplate was gone. Even his posture looked different, less confident, more guarded. His hands rested on the table in front of him, fingers occasionally tapping against the wood. His jaw clenched whenever a camera shutter clicked. His eyes avoided the front row of spectators, especially the small family seated there. They were impossible to miss. Lily's mother sat stiff and upright, clutching a worn leather purse against her chest as if it were a shield. Her dark eyes were rimmed red from months of sleepless nights. She kept her gaze fixed straight ahead, not on the jury, not on the judge, but on a single empty spot in the courtroom. Beside her sat Lily's father, Daniel, broad-shouldered and quiet. His hands were wrapped around his wife's trembling fingers. His face was carved from restraint, pain hidden beneath a calm exterior. Between them sat their daughter. 3-year-old Lily looked impossibly small on the long wooden bench. Her legs dangled, feet barely brushing the ground. She wore a light blue dress with tiny white flowers and clutched a faded pink teddy bear missing one eye. Her curls bounced whenever she shifted. Unlike everyone else in the room, Lily showed no fear. She studied everything: the tall American flag beside the judge, the brass clock ticking above the gallery, the uniformed officers, the reporters scribbling furiously. Then her gaze landed on something that made the room feel even heavier. At the far side of the courtroom sat. The police dog lay calmly on a black mat beside his current handler, Officer. His glossy black and tan coat shimmered under the fluorescent lights. His ears were upright, eyes alert, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. To most people, looked composed. But to those who knew working dogs, there was something different about him today. His tail wasn't wagging. His body was tense. His eyes flickered constantly, scanning exits, watching faces, sensing the emotional storm swirling around him. Had been part of the raid that shattered the family months earlier. And today, he was both witness and silent participant in the trial that would decide whether his former handler, Mark, had crossed the line. The bailiff called for order, and the murmurs in the room gradually faded into an uneasy hush. Even the reporters lowered their voices to whispers. Judge Caldwell adjusted her glasses. "This court is now in session," she said firmly. Her voice echoed against the high walls. Mark shifted in his seat, tightened her grip on Lily. Daniel swallowed hard. Somewhere in the back of the room, a camera lens clicked. The prosecutor, Ms. Hart, stood slowly. She was sharp, composed, and relentless, known across Colorado for dismantling powerful defendants with calm precision. She spoke about the night of the raid, her voice steady but charged with emotion. At 2:17 a.m., officers stormed apartment 4B in a low-income complex on West Avenue. They were acting on an anonymous tip claiming that Lily's uncle, Aaron, was hiding illegal substances. Neighbors said the building shook with pounding boots. Doors were kicked in. A dog barked. A man screamed. And by dawn, Aaron lay in a hospital bed with deep bite wounds, broken ribs, and trauma he would carry for the rest of his life. The defense argued that followed protocol. The prosecution argued he didn't. The courtroom felt like a pressure cooker. Then something shifted. Lily, who had been sitting quietly between her parents, suddenly leaned forward. Her small fingers released her mother's hand. Before could react, Lily slid off the bench. Gasps rippled through the room as the little girl began walking, not toward the judge, not toward the jury, but toward. Every adult in the room froze. Officer stiffened, instinctively placing a hand near his harness. Mark's breath hitched. Shot up halfway from her seat, Lily no. But before she could reach her daughter, Lily stopped. She stood just a few feet in front of the massive police dog. Silence swallowed the room whole. The ticking clock above the gallery suddenly sounded deafening. Reporters leaned forward. Jurors stared in disbelief. Even Judge Caldwell slowly lowered her gavel. Lily tilted her head, studying as if she were looking at an old friend rather than a trained police animal. His ears twitched. His breathing changed. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He didn't move toward her. Instead, something remarkable happened. He lowered his head. His posture softened. His tail gave the slightest, almost imperceptible wag. Lily clutched her teddy bear against her chest. Then, in a voice so soft that some people almost missed it, she spoke. "Bad night," she whispered. The words rippled through the courtroom like a shockwave. A reporter dropped her pen. A juror sucked in a sharp breath, covered her mouth in disbelief. But Lily wasn't finished. She took one tiny step closer and said again, this time clearer, "You were scared." The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Mark's face drained of color. Officer glanced down at in stunned confusion. Judge Caldwell slowly sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Dr. Brooks, an animal behavior specialist seated near the back, leaned forward, eyes locked on the interaction. Did not look away from Lily. His ears flattened slightly. His head dipped lower. And for the first time that day, the perfectly trained police dog looked less like an instrument of law enforcement and more like a creature carrying an invisible burden. Rushed forward now, scooping Lily into her arms. "I'm so sorry," she whispered to the court, voice trembling. She didn't mean to interrupt. But Judge Caldwell didn't scold her. She simply stared at the child, at the dog, at the man on trial. And for a long moment, no one spoke. Because everyone in that room understood something instinctively, even if they couldn't explain it. What had just happened was not ordinary. And it was not accidental. Lily had said something that touched a nerve in the court, in the jury, and in himself. As security gently guided her back to her seat, Lily turned her head one last time toward the dog. Met her gaze. And in that silent exchange, something unspoken passed between them. The judge finally broke the silence with a single, heavy word. "Recess." Her gavel slammed down. But as people began to murmur, stand, and shuffle out of the courtroom, one question hung in the air like smoke. What did a 3-year-old really know about that terrible night? And why did a highly trained police dog seem to understand her the night still lived in the walls of West Apartments? Even months later, neighbors said they could feel it when they walked past apartment 4B, like a memory soaked into the paint, the carpet, and the cracked hallway tiles. It was 2:17 a.m. when the building first trembled. Most residents were asleep, televisions humming softly, ceiling fans spinning lazily in the summer heat. A stray cat dozed near the stairwell. The elevator flickered with a dim yellow light. Then everything shattered. Boots slammed against the metal staircase. Radios crackled. Flashlights cut through the darkness like blades. Doors rattled along the hall as officers stormed upward in formation. Inside the apartment, Aaron lay on his couch, half asleep, the glow of a muted television flickering across his face. He wasn't a criminal mastermind, just a tired mechanic who worked double shifts, struggling to make rent. In the bedroom next door, sister slept with her 2 young boys. No one heard the knock. There was no warning. Only a deafening crash as the door splintered inward. Wood exploded into shards. A blinding flashlight beam flooded the room. "Police, get on the ground," voices shouted in unison. Aaron jolted upright, confused, blinded, heart racing. His hands flew up instinctively. "I didn't do anything," he yelled. "Wait, stop." That's when the barking began. Burst through the doorway like a bolt of living lightning, muscles coiled, teeth visible, growl vibrating deep in his chest. Behind him stood Officer Mark, gripping the leash tightly, his jaw clenched, adrenaline surging through his veins. Footage later showed chaos. Screams from the bedroom. Furniture overturned. A glass table shattering. Aaron scrambling backward toward the wall, hands still raised, panic flooding his face. "Don't move," shouted. "I'm not moving," Aaron cried, called him off. But lunged. Not fully unleashed, yet dangerous enough to terrify. Neighbors later said they heard Aaron scream, louder than anything they'd ever heard in their lives. In the hallway, other officers shouted conflicting orders. "Hold him. Secure the room. Dog back, dog back." But the situation spiraled out of control in seconds. Inside courtroom 7B, the giant screen flickered to life as prosecutors played that footage for the jury. The room grew heavy. Some jurors looked away. Others leaned forward, horrified. Lily sat silently on her mother's lap, staring at the screen with unsettling calm, not like a frightened child, but like someone who recognized what she was seeing. The video jumped forward. Aaron was now on the ground, pinned beneath an officer's knee, hands cuffed behind his back, his face pressed into the carpet. And still stood over him. Barking. Straining. His teeth inches from Aaron's neck. "Stand down," ordered sharply. But his voice trembled. Dr. Brooks, the animal behavior expert, watched from the back row, her pen frozen above her notepad. She noticed something subtle that most people missed. Wasn't just aggressive. He looked conflicted. His body leaned forward, but his eyes flickered with uncertainty. As if part of him wanted to obey, and part of him wanted to retreat. The footage cut again. This time from a neighbor's shaky phone camera peeking through a cracked door. Aaron was now bleeding from his arm, teeth marks visible through torn fabric. Paramedics rushed in. Sister sobbed uncontrollably in the background, clutching her children. Stood off to the side, breathing hard, staring at like a man wrestling with his own conscience. The courtroom was silent except for the video's audio. When the screen went black, no one spoke for a long moment. Then the prosecutor turned toward the jury. "This is what happens when power is abused," she said coldly. "This is what happens when fear overrides judgment." Mark shifted in his seat. His eyes flicked involuntarily toward Lily. She was still watching him. Not angrily. Not accusingly. Just watching. After the recess, the courtroom buzzed with tension as people filtered back in. Reporters whispered in corners. Lawyers whispered to their teams. Spectators murmured among themselves. returned to his place beside Officer. But something had changed. He no longer looked calm. His ears twitched constantly. His tail lay flat against the floor. His gaze kept drifting toward the family and especially toward Lily. Held her daughter than before. Daniel leaned in close and whispered, "It's okay, baby, you're safe." But Lily didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the dog. Judge Caldwell cleared her throat, bringing the room back to order. The defense attorney rose. He argued that Officer had followed protocol, that was trained to subdue threats, that Aaron had made a sudden movement, that mistakes happen in high-stress situations. But as he spoke, something strange happened. Let out a low whimper. Barely audible, but enough that people noticed. A juror turned sharply. A reporter glanced up. Dr. Brooks leaned forward again. Lily slipped from her mother's lap. Gasped Lily, "Stay." But the little girl was already moving. Again. This time more confidently. She walked straight toward, her tiny shoes tapping softly against the courtroom floor. Cameras clicked wildly. Security hesitated. Officer stiffened, hand hovering over his harness. But didn't move. He watched her approach with intense focus. Lily stopped in front of him once more. She didn't reach for him this time. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then she spoke, louder than before, clear enough that every single person in the courtroom heard. "You were there." A chill swept the room. Swallowed hard. Dr. Brooks's breath caught. His body shifted. His head dipped lower. His breathing quickened. Lily continued, her voice eerily calm for a 3-year-old. "You tried to be good." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others felt goosebumps crawl up their arms. Stood now torn between fear and shock. "Lily, come back," she whispered desperately. But the judge did not interrupt. Instead, she watched, eyes narrowed, mind racing. Suddenly, the courtroom speakers crackled. A voice came through. "Your Honor, new evidence has just been submitted." The lights flickered. The massive screen behind the judge blinked to life again, this time showing footage no one had seen before. A grainy timestamp glowed in the corner, 2:19 a.m. The night of the raid. The room leaned forward. On the screen, Officer appeared in the hallway outside apartment 4B, alone with. He knelt beside the dog. His face pale. His voice low. And what he said sent a wave of shock through the courtroom. "I need you to do this." Lily's small hand tightened around her teddy bear. His ears flattened completely. And just before the video cut out, Lily whispered one final line. "So you did." The judge slammed her gavel. "Stop the recording." But it was too late. The words and the moment were already burned into everyone's memory. As court adjourned for the day, one question echoed through every mind. What really happened in that hallway at 2:19 a.m.? And did a 3-year-old girl somehow understand something the adults refused to face? The courtroom did not return to normal after that day. Even when the benches emptied, the lights dimmed, and the echo of footsteps faded into the marble halls, something heavy lingered in courtroom 7B, like an unfinished truth breathing quietly in the corners. Reporters camped outside overnight. News vans lined the street. Protesters gathered on both sides of the case, some demanding justice for Aaron, others insisting that police officers like Mark were being unfairly. Inside the courthouse, tension simmered like a storm that refused to break. When court resumed the next morning, every seat was filled long before Judge Caldwell entered. Microphones were adjusted, cameras were set, and whispers fluttered through the gallery. Lily arrived holding her mother's hand. looked exhausted, eyes hollow, shoulders tight, face pale. Daniel walked beside them, protective and silent, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful. Lily, however, seemed unchanged. She still carried her one-eyed teddy bear, still wore her blue dress, still looked around with curious, observant eyes that felt far too mature for a 3-year-old. Was already in place beside Officer. But today, the dog was different. His body was lower to the ground, his tail pressed flat, his ears flicked constantly toward the family, toward Lily. When she entered, lifted his head slowly. Their eyes met across the room. And for a brief second, it felt less like a courtroom and more like a quiet conversation between two beings who understood each other in a way no human could. Judge Caldwell took her seat and called the court to order. The prosecutor stood first. She spoke calmly, but her words cut deep. She replayed the final seconds of yesterday's footage, kneeling beside, whispering, "I need you to do this." She turned toward the jury. "Ladies, and this was not a dog acting independently. This was a handler pushing his K9 beyond reasonable control." Mark stared at the table in front of him, knuckles white where his hands gripped the edge. Then, unexpectedly, the defense attorney requested that Dr. Brooks, the animal behavior expert, take the stand. Dr. Brooks walked forward with careful confidence. She was composed, but her eyes carried concern. She described how police dogs are trained. They are taught obedience. They are conditioned to trust their handler above all else. They are rewarded for compliance and punished for hesitation. But they are not machines, she said firmly. They are emotional animals who experience stress, fear, confusion, and moral conflict. She turned slightly toward. His behavior during the raid suggests he was uncertain. His body language was inconsistent. His posture shifted between aggression and retreat. A murmur spread through the gallery. Then Dr. Brooks said something that made the room lean forward. "I believe was torn between his training and his instincts." At that moment, Lily slipped off her mother's lap. Again. Reached for her too late. Lily walked straight toward the witness stand, not toward this time, but toward Dr. Brooks. Security hesitated. Judge Caldwell raised a hand, let her pass. Lily stopped at the edge of the stand and looked up at Dr. Brooks. Then she pointed, not at the dog, but at the empty space where had stood in the video. Her voice was soft but clear. "He didn't want to." The room froze. A reporter's camera slipped from her hands. Dr. Brooks swallowed hard. His breath hitched sharply. Lily turned now toward. "You were scared," she repeated, but this time it sounded less like a statement and more like recognition. Shifted on his mat. His head dipped lower. His breathing grew shallow. Then slowly he stood. Gasps filled the courtroom. Officer instinctively tightened his grip on the leash, but did not pull. Instead, he walked calm, deliberate toward Lily. Not toward the judge. Not toward the child. Cameras clicked wildly. Stood abruptly, torn between fear and disbelief. Lily. But Judge Caldwell did not intervene. She watched. So did the jury. So did everyone. Stopped directly in front of Lily and sat. Their faces were nearly level. Lily reached out her tiny hand. For a heartbeat, the entire room held its breath. Then she placed her hand gently on his head. He did not flinch. He did not move. Instead, his eyes softened in a way no one in that courtroom had ever seen from a police dog before. Lily spoke again. "You tried." Dr. Brooks felt chills crawl up her spine. She leaned toward the judge. "Your Honor, I request permission to conduct a brief behavioral observation." Judge Caldwell nodded slowly. Dr. Brooks knelt beside Lily, keeping her voice gentle. "Sweetheart," she said, "how do you know these things?" Lily tilted her head, thinking, as if the answer were obvious. "He remembers," she replied simply. The word rippled through the courtroom like thunder. Dr. Brooks straightened, her heart racing. She turned toward the jury. "What this child is describing aligns with canine trauma memory. Dogs don't remember events like we do, they remember emotions." She paused. "And right now is displaying signs of deep emotional distress linked to that night." Mark's composure finally cracked. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembled, his breathing became uneven. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. Before he could say anything, a court officer rushed in, handing a folder to the judge. Judge Caldwell opened it slowly. Her face changed. The room noticed immediately. She looked up at the prosecutor. "Counsel," she said quietly, "it appears we have additional evidence." The lights dimmed. The massive screen behind her flickered to life. A new video appeared clearer than before. Not footage, not a neighbor's recording, but hallway security footage from the apartment complex. The timestamp glowed, 2:18 a.m. On the screen, Mark stood in the hallway with Aaron was already on the ground inside the apartment, clearly restrained. Hesitated. He looked uncertain. Whined softly beside him. Then another officer appeared behind, speaking harshly, though the audio was faint. Straightened. He tightened his grip on the leash and stepped forward. The video froze. The judge turned too. "Officer, would you care to explain what happened in that moment?" Opened his mouth, but no words came out. At that exact second, Lily turned toward him. Her gaze was steady. Not angry. Not afraid. Simply searching. She spoke one last time, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "You made him." His face drained of all color. His shoulders began to shake. The gavel hovered in Judge Caldwell's hand. Lowered his head to the floor, his body still but trembling. And in that unbearable silence, the entire courtroom realized something chilling. This was no longer just a trial about police misconduct. It was a reckoning between truth, power, and a dog who had been forced to carry a decision that was never his to make. As the judge finally slammed her gavel and called for an emergency recess, one question echoed louder than ever. What would Mark finally admit? And what role had truly played that night? The courtroom felt heavier after the recess than it had that morning. Even the sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed muted, as if the room itself had absorbed the tension of the trial. Dr. Brooks adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. She had spent years studying police dogs, trauma, and memory, and she had never seen anything like this. Not in a 3-year-old, not in a highly trained K9. "Does not remember events as humans do," she began, her voice calm but carrying weight. "He remembers emotions, fear, confusion, pain, stress, loyalty, and guilt." She paused, letting the jury absorb her words. The jurors leaned forward. Cameras clicked. Officer shifted uncomfortably in his seat, jaw tight, hands balled into fists. Dr. Brooks continued. On the night of the raid, experienced multiple conflicting commands from his handler. He was told to apprehend a perceived threat, while also restrained by law enforcement protocol. These contradictions caused extreme stress. It is clear from the footage and behavioral signs that instincts were at war with his training. She gestured toward the dog, who was now sitting stiffly at Officer's side. His tail twitched subtly, ears flicking toward the jury and the family in the front row. "Remembers fear," she said, almost whispering. "And he remembers hesitation. He remembers the moral decision he was forced to make. That hesitation is why he reacted the way he did in that hallway." A juror whispered to another, barely audible, He understood." Dr. Brooks nodded. Yes, dogs don't rationalize like we do. They don't articulate guilt with words, but they feel consequences. They remember emotional weight, and was carrying that weight from that night. Clutched Lily's hand. Lily's small fingers gripped her mother's tightly, but her gaze never wavered from. Then the unthinkable happened. Lily slipped from her mother's lap again. Gasped Lily, "Don't." But the child moved with surprising purpose for her age. She walked straight toward. The courtroom went silent, security froze, officers tensed. The judge's hand hovered over the gavel. His ears twitched, his tail pressed flat, his body froze, then slowly, deliberately he stood. He walked toward Lily. Not aggressively, not playfully, but with an intent so precise that it sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. He stopped directly in front of her. Their eyes met. The world outside the courtroom disappeared. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Lily reached out her small hand. Lowered his head. His breath hitched. Daniel leaned forward, white-knuckled. Reporters held their cameras high, capturing a moment that no one could describe with words alone. "You didn't want to hurt him," Lily whispered. His tail twitched once, his ears flattened, his eyes softened. Dr. Brooks stepped closer, her voice low but urgent. "Observe closely. This is processing trauma. He recognizes the child's intent. He is not responding to words, he is responding to emotional understanding." Mark's face went pale. His eyes darted between and Lily, as if trying to read something beyond human comprehension. "Your Honor," Dr. Brooks continued, "this interaction is crucial. Remembers the night of the raid, the stress, the fear, and the moral conflict. He is showing signs of recognition that directly contradict officers' testimony." The defense attorney rose, frowning. "Objection, Your Honor. A child's words have no bearing on the trial." Judge Caldwell shook her head. "The court will allow observation, but no commentary will influence the jury outside of expert testimony." Lily, undeterred, whispered again "It wasn't your fault." His eyes lingered on her. He lowered his head almost imperceptibly. His body trembled. The courtroom was so silent that the faint sound of his breathing seemed amplified. Dr. Brooks knelt beside now, carefully, her hands hovering near his harness. "Can you recall that night?" He twitched, ears back, head slightly turned. His eyes remained locked on Lily. A juror swallowed audibly. Another murmured, "I've never seen anything like this." Then, just as the tension reached its peak, the prosecutor requested the court to replay previously unseen footage from a neighbor's phone. The video was shaky, grainy but unmistakable. It showed the hallway outside apartment 4B. Aaron was already on the ground, restrained by officers. His hands were cuffed, his eyes wide, terrified. Mark stood nearby, leash in hand. His posture was tense, uncertain. Then bent slightly, speaking softly. His words were barely audible. "Do it. I need you to do this." His body shifted, hesitation clear in every movement. His ears flattened. He whined once. Then he lunged slightly forward, only because grip forced the action. Gasped audibly. Lily's small hand tightened around her teddy bear. Dr. Brooks leaned forward. This is the exact moment's instincts conflicted with his training. He remembers it vividly, and he is responding emotionally right now in court. Mark's hands shook on the table. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came. The jury leaned forward as the prosecutor spoke. "This dog carries the truth of what happened, and now a child has articulated it." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Then the room grew colder, in a way that wasn't physical. Because everyone present realized something impossible. The child and the dog together were telling a story. A story no adult could deny. Judge Caldwell banged her gavel. "We will continue, but let this moment remain in your minds. It may be relevant to testimony yet to come. The gallery murmured, cameras clicked, sat back down beside Officer, still trembling slightly but calmer now. Lily returned to her mother's lap, exhaled shakily, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. Mark sank into his chair, pale, silent, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The courtroom waited. And in that pregnant silence, one question hung in the air like a shadow. What would Say next, and could he withstand the combined truth of a child's words and a dog's memory? Because the night of the raid was far from over in anyone's mind. And the real revelations were only beginning. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the faint hum of the air vents disappeared into the heavy silence. All eyes were on Mark, seated rigidly at the defense table. His knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the polished wooden desk, jaw clenched, shoulders trembling ever so slightly. For months he had rehearsed his statements, rehearsed his excuses, rehearsed his denial. But now, under the piercing gaze of the jury, the weight of a child's words and a dog's memory pressed down on him like concrete. Sat forward on the edge of her seat. Her hand shook slightly as she clutched Lily's arm. Daniel's lips were pressed into a thin line, eyes never leaving. Lily, calm as ever, still held her teddy bear and stared at, whose gaze had never left her. The prosecutor rose, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. "Officer," she said, voice steady and cold, "after seeing the footage and observing behavior in this courtroom, can you explain why you instructed the dog to attack Mr. when he was already restrained?" The courtroom seemed to contract. His throat moved. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The room was so quiet that the sound of a camera shutter echoed like a gunshot. Finally he spoke, voice low and trembling. I thought he was resisting, I thought." His words trailed off. Lily tilted her head slightly and whispered too, "He's scared too." The jurors shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Brooks leaned forward, nodding the subtle tremor in his posture, his head lowering slightly, ears pinned back, body tight but attentive. Even the officers in the courtroom stiffened, sensing the emotional charge in the air. Inhaled sharply, attempting to regain composure. "I was following protocol. I trained to handle threats. I thought Aaron was a threat." The prosecutor's eyes narrowed. "But he was on the ground, he was restrained. The video clearly shows it, and hesitated before you ordered him forward. Why?" His hands shook as he gripped the edge of the table. His face drained of color. He swallowed hard. I panicked," he admitted almost inaudibly. "I saw him move suddenly, I thought." He trailed off again. Dr. Brooks spoke gently, yet with authority. "Officer's behavior is consistent with an animal experiencing moral conflict. He hesitated because he sensed the innocence of Mr. And now, under observation, he is reacting emotionally to your admission." His lips trembled. He lowered his head and ran a hand over his face. I never wanted to hurt anyone," he whispered. I trusted him to follow my lead, but I lost control. I didn't mean it." The courtroom was silent. Then Lily, with her tiny voice carrying over the hushed room, spoke again. "You made him, but he didn't want to." It was a simple statement, yet it held a profound weight. The words reverberated through the room. The jury's eyes widened, Dr. Brooks's breath caught. Even the defense attorney's jaw tightened, his pen frozen mid-note. Shifted slightly. His tail flicked. He lowered his head as if acknowledging Lily's words. The dog's eyes held something almost human, recognition, understanding, a silent judgment of the man who had led him astray. His hands fell to the table, his face twisted with a mix of shame and fear. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was protecting my team, but I can't stop seeing it. I can't stop hearing the screams. He broke down completely. Tears rolled down his face. His body shook with the weight of months of guilt, fear, and suppressed panic. His eyes welled. Daniel's hands tightened into fists. Lily simply watched, still clutching her teddy bear, still staring at with quiet understanding. The prosecutor paused, letting the moment linger. "Officer, it is clear that hesitated because he sensed the truth. He knew Mr. posed no threat, and yet you forced him forward. Do you admit that your actions caused unnecessary harm?" Nodded, barely able to speak. Yes, I did. I made a mistake. I. Suddenly, the courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff rushed in, holding a USB drive. "Your Honor, new evidence has just been submitted by the city police department." Judge Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "Let's see it." The screen flickered to life again. This time, the footage came from a security camera in the hallway outside apartment 4B, a view no one had previously seen. The timestamp glowed, 2:20 a.m. On the screen, stood in the hallway with leash in hand. Aaron was lying on the ground inside the apartment, clearly restrained. Bent slightly and spoke softly, words indistinguishable from the angle of the camera. Then shifted. He hesitated. His body language screamed indecision, ears back, head lowered, tail flat. And then his hand tightened on the leash, lunged forward, but the footage revealed something critical. The dog's movement was not aggressive. It was coerced. It was forced. The courtroom erupted in whispers. His face turned ashen. The prosecutor's voice cut through the murmurs. "This footage shows that acted under duress. His hesitation, his restraint, his emotional conflict, all ignored by officer. This is undeniable proof of misconduct." His lips quivered. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came. His previous bravado had been replaced entirely by raw fear and shame. Lily tilted her head at again. She whispered, "You told them." The dog's eyes glistened. His breathing steadied slightly, and he sat obediently, calm but vigilant, as if acknowledging her statement. His face was pale, tears streaking down her cheeks. Daniel's hand squeezed hers tightly. The jurors shifted in their seats, whispering among themselves. For the first time in months, it felt as though the truth, the emotional, moral truth of that night, was visible in the room. Sank into his chair, silent and defeated. The full weight of what had happened, his decisions, the trauma he caused, the dog's hesitation, the child's insight, pressed down on him like an avalanche. And for the courtroom, the moment ended in tense stillness. But outside, whispers spread quickly. A 3-year-old spoke to the police dog, and the dog remembered everything. And as the court prepared to resume the trial, one question lingered like a shadow. Could officer withstand the truth and Lily had revealed, or would the revelations yet to come break him completely? The courtroom hummed with tension, every eye fixed on Mark. He sat slumped in his chair, face pale and drenched in sweat, hands still trembling. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances, whispering quietly among themselves, while reporters clicked and flashed their cameras, capturing each fleeting moment of his unraveling composure. Suddenly, without warning, the lights flickered, then went out entirely. The courtroom plunged into near darkness. The murmur of voices rose into anxious whispers. Chairs scraped across the polished marble floor. The heavy oak doors groaned as people instinctively shifted, trying to find their bearings. A few gasped. A reporter cursed under her breath, fumbling for a flashlight on her phone. "What happened?" whispered, gripping Lily's arm. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his voice tense. His eyes darted toward the judge, who had raised a hand to maintain order. Immediately reacted. The dog's ears twitched, his body stiffened, and his tail lowered slightly. He sniffed the air, head tilting from side to side as if sensing a disturbance far beyond human perception. Froze, his hands hovered above the desk. "Not now, not now," he muttered under his breath, panic edging into his tone. "Security," Judge Caldwell barked. "Check the electrical panel immediately." Voices called out, footsteps ran along the floorboards, and a bailiff's radio crackled. Then the room grew colder. Not a draft, not from the air vents, but an inexplicable chill that made every person in the room shiver. When the emergency lights finally flickered on, a shocking realization gripped everyone present. Was no longer at his designated spot beside Officer. The dog had vanished. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Security officers jumped from their posts, scanning every corner, every shadow. The jury froze. Reporters aimed their cameras frantically toward the empty mat. "Where did he go?" one juror whispered. His face turned white. She grabbed Lily tightly, pulling her close. His eyes widened. He whispered something under his breath, trembling, "No, no, not again." The courtroom monitors were quickly checked. Security cameras revealed an unbelievable sight. Was moving down the hallway, but he wasn't running. He wasn't being aggressive. He was moving with deliberate intent, his head slightly lowered, tail stiff but controlled. And behind him, almost reluctantly, Officer followed. Not commanding, not restraining, following. It was the opposite of everything a police dog and handler were trained to do. Lily's small hand tightened around her teddy bear. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "He's looking for the truth." His mouth opened in disbelief, but before she could respond, the judge called for calm. "Security, secure the hall immediately." By now, the video feed had been pulled up on the main screen in the courtroom. Everyone watched in stunned silence, and were moving through the dimly lit hallway outside the courtroom, toward a stairwell that led to the lower levels of the courthouse. One security officer spoke into his radio, voice strained. "They're heading toward the service entrance. I'm moving teams now." Meanwhile, Lily leaned forward in her mother's lap. "He's scared," she murmured, "and he's following him." No one responded. Outside the building, the city's morning traffic continued as usual, oblivious to the drama unfolding within the courthouse walls. Helicopters were already on alert, hovering nearby as police officers mobilized in response to sudden departure with. Inside the courthouse, the tension was palpable. The judge slammed her gavel. "Remain in your seats. No one leaves until the situation is secured." But the courthouse, it seemed, had already been overtaken by a different kind of authority. The instinct, the memory, and the moral compass of a dog whose training had collided with something deeper than obedience. Minutes stretched into agonizing tension, then the monitors flickered. His movements grew more deliberate. He wasn't following the hallways randomly. He was searching, seeking, judging. Then, in a moment that felt surreal, the live feed showed halting near an old, unused storage room. He bent over, speaking low, trembling. Lowered his head, ears back, tail pressed close to his body. Inside the courtroom, Dr. Brooks leaned forward, whispering to herself. He's revisiting the moment. He's reliving it. He's weighing what he did and the consequences he carried. The jurors watched in stunned silence. Then something incredible happened. After a tense pause, turned sharply and looked directly into the camera, as if staring back at the courtroom itself. His gaze was intense, almost accusatory, filled with knowledge, memory, and awareness. And then the screen went black. A power surge had cut the feed. The courtroom erupted into murmurs and whispers. Security officers scrambled, checking connections, resetting monitors and verifying the feeds. Held Lily close, whispering, Did he see it?" Lily's small fingers pressed against her teddy bear. "He remembers," she said softly. "He saw it, he knows." Even Dr. Brooks couldn't hide her astonishment. She murmured, "I've studied trauma responses in dogs for decades. I've never seen anything like this. Is aware in a way most animals never are." Remained frozen at the defense table, staring at the blank screen, sweat rolling down his temples. His body slumped. His hands gripped the edge of the desk as if holding onto reality itself. Then, without warning, the courtroom door slammed open. A security officer's voice cut through the chaos. "They're outside, moving toward the alley." The murmurs escalated into panic. Reporters scrambled to their feet. The judge slammed her gavel again, calling for order, but the room was a storm of tension and disbelief. Looked down at Lily. Her daughter's face was calm, unreadable. "He's going to show them," Lily whispered. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom knew one undeniable truth. The dog was not just a witness. He was a messenger. And the story was far from over. Because the truth that night, and the path now walked, would change everything. The final question hung in the air like smoke. Where would lead officer? And what would they find when they got there? The courthouse corridors were dimly lit, the emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows along the polished walls. Every sound echoed: hurried footsteps, radios crackling, shoes scuffing against the floor. But through the chaos, one presence moved with unnerving purpose. The dog led the way, muscles taut, head low, ears flicking like radar dishes. Followed behind, leash in hand, his body stiff and trembling. It was not a march of authority, it was a march of reckoning. Outside the courtroom, jurors and reporters pressed against the doors, craning to see anything through the small glass panels. The murmurs were deafening, a mix of panic, disbelief, and awe. "He's leading him somewhere," Dr. Brooks whispered to a security officer. "And it's not random, knows exactly where he's going." Gripped Lily tightly, whispering, "Stay back, stay calm." But Lily's eyes were fixed, unblinking, on the monitors showing the hallway cameras. Her small fingers pressed into her teddy bear. "He's taking him to the truth," she said, voice quiet but unwavering. Steps faltered as they turned a corner. His knuckles whitened on the leash. Sweat dripped down his forehead. For the first time, he didn't bark orders or give commands. His usual confidence was gone, replaced with fear, guilt, and raw realization. His paws made soft thuds against the linoleum floor. Each step was deliberate, precise, intentional, as if he was navigating a path only he could see, one that mirrored the night of the raid. They approached a narrow service stairwell, rarely used, lined with old lockers and maintenance equipment. The faint smell of dust and cleaning chemicals hung in the air. And then they stopped, lowered his head, and stared at a locked metal door at the base of the stairs. Hesitated, his voice was barely audible, shaking. This isn't supposed to be." But didn't move. He sat rigidly, gaze fixed on. His eyes seemed to say, "This is where it all started, face it." His hand trembled on the leash. Memories flooded him. The screams of Aaron, the chaos in apartment 4B, the roar of barking, the command that had forced the dog forward, and the guilt he had tried to bury ever since. Whined softly, a low sound that reverberated with emotion, fear, regret, recognition. It was a sound could not ignore, and for a moment the man's hardened demeanor cracked completely. And Lily watched through the courtroom monitor, breaths held. "He remembers everything," Lily whispered, "and now he wants to remember too." The door creaked as finally fumbled with the lock. His hands shook violently. The key turned, and the door opened slowly, revealing a storage room filled with files, boxes, and long-forgotten courthouse equipment. Inside, a dusty archive of police reports, maintenance logs, and surveillance tapes lined the walls. But in the center of the room lay a small, forgotten evidence locker, one that had never been disclosed in court. Padded forward, nose twitching, he stopped before the locker and sat, tail still, head low. He wasn't just identifying it, he was insisting. Swallowed hard, his voice barely audible, cracked like dry wood. I did." But nudged the locker gently with his nose, then whined again. The implication was clear. This is where the truth is hiding. Sank to his knees, staring at the locker as if it were both a punishment and a revelation. Memories of the raid hit him in waves. Aaron restrained, hesitating, forcing the dog forward, and the chaos that had erupted. For months, he had tried to rationalize, justify, and suppress it all. But the locker and the dog demanded acknowledgement. He opened it. Inside were files and tapes he hadn't expected anyone to see, incident reports with missing notes, camera footage from the night of the raid that contradicted his statements, evidence that showed hesitation, and that had knowingly pushed the dog beyond protocol. His body went rigid. His mind raced. He realized with sickening clarity that the truth was no longer his to hide. Whined again, a sound full of pressure and expectation, as if demanding confession. Then looked up and the dog's eyes met his, not just alert but knowing, judgmental, expectant. I made a mistake," whispered, voice breaking. I forced him. I." Lowered his head slowly, a soft exhale escaping his nostrils. It was a sigh of acknowledgement, not forgiveness, but recognition that the man had finally admitted what the dog had always known. In the courtroom, the jurors leaned forward. The monitors flickered as security technicians restored the live feed. The audience in 7B watched the moment unfold, riveted. Lily whispered too, "He's telling the truth now." Nodded, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Daniel's hand found hers, squeezing tightly. And then, something no one expected happened. The footage from inside the storage room, now playing live, showed pulling out an envelope from the evidence locker. Inside were unedited videos of the raid, clear, shocking, undeniable. Every hesitation by, every command from, every moment of chaos, fully documented. The judge's eyes widened. Dr. Brooks leaned forward, amazed. Even the reporters gasped audibly. And in that instant, the room seemed to collectively realize the magnitude of the truth. The entire narrative of that night, hesitation, coercion, and the child's perception was about to be laid bare for everyone. Sank to the floor, head in hands. Sat beside him, calm, obedient, yet undeniably aware of the weight of what had just been revealed. The final chilling truth hung in the air. A 3-year-old had seen the unseeable. A police dog had remembered the unrememberable. And now the evidence, undeniable and unalterable, had surfaced. The question remained: how would the courtroom react to what they were about to witness? Because the story was no longer just about guilt or innocence. It was about truth, memory, and justice, revealed through a child and a dog. The courtroom was electric, every heartbeat echoing in the marble chambers. Screens flickered as the newly recovered footage from the storage locker played on the massive monitors, grainy yet undeniable. The jurors leaned forward as if drawn by invisible strings, their eyes wide, every whisper of doubt vanishing into the thick, tense air. The video showed Aaron restrained on the ground, frozen in a moment of agonizing hesitation, and his trembling hand forcing the dog forward. Each second was a revelation, a silent witness that could not lie. The courtroom held its collective breath. Sat on the floor of the storage room feed, head in hands, body trembling. The weight of his actions had finally broken through the shield he had built around himself. He could no longer hide. He could no longer rationalize. The raw truth was in front of everyone, impossible to deny, impossible to twist. Dr. Brooks, standing in the courtroom, whispered to herself, barely audible, "The dog is a perfect witness, and the child, she's the interpreter." All eyes turned to Lily, perched on her mother's lap. Her small hand clutched the teddy bear tightly, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and understanding. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "He knew, and he remembers too." Pressed her hand to Lily's mouth, trying to contain her emotions, but it was clear to everyone. This little girl had seen more than most adults could ever perceive. She had interpreted its memory, translated the emotional truth, and revealed what no testimony or report could fully convey. The prosecutor stood, voice firm but restrained. "Ladies and of the jury, what you have just witnessed is not merely a police raid. It is a sequence of decisions, human and animal, that caused unnecessary fear and harm." Hesitated because he sensed the truth. Aaron was not a threat, and yet officer, despite knowing it, coerced him to act. The jury shifted uncomfortably, murmuring to one another. The evidence was stark, raw, and undeniable. Every witness, every video, every expert opinion aligned. His voice cracked as he finally spoke. I failed. I forced when he didn't want to. I didn't see it clearly. I didn't realize until now the consequences, all of it. He looked at whose head was lowered, eyes watching intently. The dog's tail was relaxed, but every movement, every flick of the ear, carried the weight of memory, acknowledgement, and moral reckoning. For a moment the courtroom fell silent, a stillness so profound it felt sacred. Then Lily spoke, clear, calm, powerful beyond her years. He knew it was wrong, he may do it, but tried to tell him no. The room froze. Even the judge's gavel seemed insignificant against the impact of her words. Judge Caldwell leaned forward, voice steady but heavy. This courtroom has witnessed something extraordinary, a child interpreting a dog's memory and a police officer confronting his own actions. This is unprecedented, but the truth cannot be ignored. The screens replayed the final moments of the raid, his hesitation crystal clear, Aaron's restrained innocence undeniable, and his coercion impossible to dispute. The jurors sat, stunned. Reporters whispered, fingers hovering over record buttons. The gallery seemed collectively suspended in disbelief, awe and the moral weight of what had occurred. Moved slightly, nudging gently with his nose, the officer flinched, then exhaled, finally accepting the dog's judgment. The unspoken message was clear: acknowledgement, accountability, truth. Reached down and lifted Lily from her lap. "You did it, baby," she whispered, tears streaming. "You saw it all." Lily held gaze through the monitors. "He remembers too," she said softly, "and he's telling everyone now." Lowered his head, tears falling freely. His entire body shook with the culmination of guilt, fear, and finally clarity. I made a mistake," he said aloud, voice raw. I forced him, and I am responsible for what happened. Not anyone else, me." A murmur of approval and shock ran through the courtroom. Even the jurors, hardened by months of deliberation, seemed to sense the moral gravity of the moment. Dr. Brooks nodded slowly. His memory is preserved through emotional imprint. What he felt, he carried with him. And today, a child translated that memory into human understanding. It is an extraordinary lesson in truth and empathy. The judge exhaled heavily. This trial is far from ordinary, but the evidence, the testimony, and now this unprecedented demonstration of memory and understanding leave no question. The jury will deliberate with all facts in mind, including the moral implications revealed through the dog and the child. Outside, the courtroom cameras continued to capture every moment. News anchors would later call it the case where a child spoke to a dog and the truth came out. Social media would erupt with debates, awe, and disbelief. Clutched Lily, who remained calm, still holding her teddy bear. Daniel wrapped an arm around them both. Sat nearby, finally relaxed, as if his role in the story had reached completion. Remained seated, head bowed, a man confronting his failures, yet acknowledging them fully. For the first time, he was accountable, not just in law, but in the eyes of truth itself. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the story lingered. A child's insight, a dog's memory, and a man's reckoning had converged to reveal what no ordinary testimony ever could. And as the final gavel echoed through the chamber, the lesson was unmistakable. Truth has many voices, some speak in words, some in actions, some in silence, and sometimes it takes both a child and a dog to make the world listen. Outside followed Lily's lead for a few steps, then paused. The little girl looked down at him, whispered, "Thank you," and hugged her teddy bear tightly. Sat tail wagging slowly, eyes soft, knowing that the night's trauma had finally been acknowledged, and justice, emotional and moral, had been served. The courtroom would remember this day forever, not just for the verdict that followed, but for the extraordinary moment when a 3-year-old spoke to a police dog, and the world froze to hear the truth. And in that pause, for one brief, perfect moment, everyone understood. Sometimes justice doesn't need words. It needs recognition, empathy, and courage from the smallest voices, and the ones we least expect.